So my name's Kristen. I'm an electronics engineer and I work for a small company called Atamo, and we do electronic product development and design for clients. So I guess you might say that I'm a professional maker, so someone pays me to make things, which is pretty cool. So I get to design printed circuit boards and I write the software that runs on them. One of the things that surprises people about professional makers, if you like, or people in the electronics business, is that we actually use a lot of the same tools that makers use. Some of the prototyping platforms, the open source hardware platforms that have come out in the last 5 to 10 years have made our lives a lot easier as well. So particularly things like Arduino. We actually use that a lot for prototyping for clients. It's cheaper, it's quicker, we can get something going for them quite quickly and they can get out and start showing it to their customers or their investors and that sort of thing. So it's something that we use quite a bit. I guess Arduino in particular, really what it's brought to electronics is two things. Firstly, it's got this stackable hardware system, so it means that you don't have to design a custom printed circuit board every time you want to do something. And you've also got this beginner-friendly kind of software framework, so even if you're not really a big kind of software person, the software's kind of fairly easy to get into and the learning curve's pretty gentle. So I think in some of the embedded software stuff I've done before, I've spent 3 days trying to get a clock working. That's really not something you have to do with Arduino, it's all pretty friendly and easy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Arduino, this is kind of what it tends to look like. It's a stackable kind of hardware system. So I don't know if you can see it very well, but the blue board in there is the core Arduino system that you use for pretty much everything, and then you stack these peripherals on top of it to do various things that you want your particular project or product to do. These examples that I found are actually fairly neat looking examples. Some of the other ones that you end up with, it's quite common to end up with bits of wire kind of hanging off and other boards and all kinds of things once you sort of get going making something. And I guess what that means is that's sort of one of the reasons that Arduino, once you actually get past prototyping and you're actually in some kind of production, it's really there's a few limitations there. So I've just talked about the bulky and messy kind of arrangement of shields and external circuitry, so that's certainly something that comes up quite often. If you're at all familiar with Arduino, I'm sure you've come across that. Low power design is really difficult with Arduino, so if you want to run an Arduino off a battery, you really have to start modifying the electronics quite a bit. You often have to get a soldering iron out and actually take off some of the parts, which if you're doing one, that's fine, but if you're trying to do hundreds, that gets fairly ridiculous fairly quickly. There's a few other issues there, particularly I guess with the time-consuming sort of assembly process. So someone actually has to sit there by hand and actually plug these things in and make the modifications that you need. So really it means that you prototype on Arduino and that's all really great, but then in order to go further you end up having to move to a custom PCB, and that inevitably means more or less starting from scratch. You might get a little bit of a bit of leverage from having started with Arduino, but you often have to do the hardware design from scratch, and you may have to write all of the software from scratch as well. So that's kind of why I'm here today, to talk to you about a platform that we're developing called duinoPRO. And we wanted to basically try and close the gap between prototyping and production and be able to use the same hardware for both things and not have to re-engineer everything in between. So duinoPRO is an Arduino compatible platform, and by that I mean that it runs in the Arduino software development environment, so you can write software in the Arduino development environment and upload that to duinoPRO. But it's a totally different form factor, so it's more of a flat kind of form factor, and it's got these like surface mount solderable modules rather than a shield stacking system, and that means it can actually be put through an assembly line, so a machine can actually make 50, 100, 200, 1,000 of these things for you, and no one has to actually sit there and hand assemble them. So that's the first part of duinoPRO, is the hardware, and the other part is that it's an online service providing customers with access to ordering customized versions of duinoPRO. So you go onto the website, you work out what kind of arrangement you want, and if you want 100 or something, you press go and off you go and you can order those. So, and then I guess some of the additional services that you sort of require often to create a product are kind of there as well. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is the baseboard. So it's a system built on a baseboard and then a bunch of modules that represent different functionality, different peripherals that you might need. So we have two different baseboards. We've got an Uno, which is based on the ATmega 328P. So for those of you who are familiar with Arduino, that's the same microcontroller that's on the Arduino Uno board. And then we've also got a Duo version, which is a really low power ARM basically, so it's got a lot more grunt and a lot more I/O and stuff like that you can use. Around the core kind of baseboard there, you've also got all these module spaces, so each module space has a common interface. You've got an SPI bus, a couple of I2C buses, 6 independent GPIO, so if you've worked with Arduino at all, you can say goodbye to the pin clashes that you often come up against with Arduino. These are all independent. Some of the module spaces have UART, so a serial port. So on the Uno we have one serial port, and on the Duo we've got 4 different module spaces that support a serial port. So this is a bit of a list of the modules that we've currently designed or have in design at the moment. So you probably recognise a few of those things there. You've got like Ethernet, Bluetooth, an accelerometer, micro SD, some LEDs, some various breakouts so that you can connect other sensors that we don't have there yet. We're constantly designing more and more of these modules, and we're finding they're quite quick to sort of turn around and get up and running. So we've got the hardware there, and we've also got software libraries in the Arduino environment that allow you to talk to these things. So really it's up to your imagination as to what you actually want to put, how you want to put all these things together and create something. Maybe you want to, you just want to make one of something and play around with that, and you can do that. Maybe you want to make many, maybe you want to give them to your friends, maybe you want a whole heap of sensors that you want to place around your house. Or maybe your idea is so good that you think you can actually create a bit of a business out of this and other people will buy it. And I guess at that point you're really a hardware startup. So I don't know how many of you are sort of familiar with all the startup kind of buzz that's happening at the moment, but a lot of that is in the software space. So people say that hardware is hard, and there's reasons for that, and one of them is manufacturing. So we wanted to make it easier for people to be able to manufacture an electronic product. So being able to come through the website, define how you want your product to look, and then push the button and get those made. That's something that makes that whole process a lot easier. There's other sort of hidden costs, I guess, associated with hardware. One of those is firmware development. So the fact that we're in the Arduino environment means that and that we're able to use the same software for prototyping and then for production means that you sort of get a much easier process through the firmware development stages. And it means that there's a lot of open source code out there on the internet as well that you can leverage and get things going with. Another thing that people don't think about so much in the hobbyist kind of space, but it's a real issue if you actually want to create a commercial product, is regulatory approval. So if you want to sell something into Australia, Europe, US, everyone has different approvals that you have to go through, different testing, different certifications that you have to get. It's a very expensive and time-consuming process, and it's a bit of a black art. There's not a lot of people that really know how it all kind of works. So having pre-approved modules makes that whole process much easier, and it's a much more defined kind of process as to how you might go about that. It's also something that we're looking at probably being able to actually offer as a service on the website. So another thing, I guess, is firmware upgradability. So once you get your product out into the field, you don't want to just kind of chuck it out there and hope that there's no bugs. That's rarely the case. So you want to be able to upgrade your product once it's out in the field. We've built hardware support into the design so that you can upgrade your firmware over XP, over Wi-Fi, whatever the peripheral happens to be. And we'll be developing the firmware support that goes with that soon. And I've already talked a little bit about maximising battery life, so being able to design, having done our hardware design really based around low power means that that you can actually run our hardware off a battery, depending obviously on what you're trying to do in the software, and that means that a lot more sort of product options are opened up to you. So where are we at? We're pre-launch, so it's been about a year from the concept through to this point, and actually having hardware and all that sort of stuff. We're currently using duinoPRO for client projects, so we've got quite a few client projects happening on the platform. We're finding that we're able to do things a lot quicker and a lot cheaper for those clients than we otherwise would. We've got a client out there at the moment who's selling one of the first projects based on duinoPRO out to his clients at the moment, so that's really exciting. We're also working with a whole bunch of alpha users who are giving us feedback, and we're improving on the documentation and all that kind of stuff and gearing up to be able to launch. We're hoping to do a Kickstarter sometime next year to actually launch to the public. So yeah, thank you for listening to my quick introduction on duinoPRO. And for supporting local innovation. So we're an Australian company. If you're interested, jump on our website and find out a little bit more. We're also on social media, or send me an email. Send us an email at info@duinopro.cc. Or come and visit us on, I think we're on stall 65. Alex and I are out there. We can show you a bit more of the hardware and talk to you a bit more about what it's about if you're interested. Thanks.